to catch a big fish. So let me welcome all of you to this session. Here we are going to discuss writing articles and having them published. During our internship, we are not really given any education about writing articles. And when we complete our education, we are able to manage a ward in a hospital, but we don't really learn how to write an article. In Turkey, the first year you learn about statistics, but at the end of your education, you don't really know how to write an article. You don't receive serious education. If you're lucky, maybe you learn something from your colleagues or from your associate professors and professors. Actually, we don't have extensive education about article writing and study preparation. I would like to get to know all of you. My name is Hasan HERKEN. I'm from Pamukkale University.
İstersen alayım mı? Hayır, başlayayım yani diye. Bunlar duyulmuyor zaten. The participants are introducing themselves, but since they're not talking into a microphone, the interpreters cannot hear. We have 5 pediatric psychiatrists. Perhaps we should organize a special congress on pediatric psychiatry. Now, I'll have to change the slides. A scientific article must have certain parts. A title and content, introduction. The purpose for publication of scientific articles is to evaluate the observations and work that you have carried out, to contribute to literature, to establish a link in the chain, and to express your ideas in the scientific arena. All these exist to a certain extent in all publications. Actually, we're publishing and writing for many reasons. Some of it we do for our career's sake, without any enjoyment. And sometimes it's either for persuasion, for having access to funds, and also perhaps to stay abroad and work there. And what is written should be written in a manner clear to understand. The titles should not be boring, full of technical terminology. In writing articles, if we take each part one by one, first of all, it should be written in the language in which it is going to be published. For example, if articles are written in Turkish and then translated into English, it's twice as hard. You have to start writing it in English because it will be with the logic of the English language. You're not writing a love letter. There is an introduction and so forth, but if you start writing it in Turkish, it's with the Turkish mentality and thinking that you start writing it. Actually, for sometimes, the first week you're unable to do anything, but then suddenly words come up and you become quite verbal, and systematically your mind starts working in that language. And people who stayed abroad, when they come back to Turkey, and some of the words they use in Turkish with an error, and also some of them sound silly. And even the publication should be clear, and all your statistics before you start undertaking it, and where it's going to be published, and sequence. But previously it was more difficult, and usually the attitude was, let's start doing it, let's do it, let's see what's going to come out. But you have to look for something, and then you will find it, and so you carry out certain tests and reach a meaningful result. Actually, since in the first place the tests are not the appropriate one, the results would not be correct. Usually, what you write is very important. It must contain clinical data. The reader does not even read the title from start to end. You sort of screen it, even if it's in your field and of interest to you. The title must be attractive and should be able to attract you. But usually you look at the summary and the abstract and find out whether it's of interest to you, what it focuses on, where the data comes from, and then the title, the reference, and the abstract. If you're convinced with the abstract, you see the whole thing. To avoid sensation in scientific articles, sometimes the titles are so boring, and it can just by chance draw the interest of people who are working on that subject. Actually, printing and publishing, when you publish something, for example, 5 years go by, what happens? How many people were interested? To what extent did it create any discussion? What about your argument? And the people read it and discuss it. But perhaps you're not mature enough to assess these matters. I think it's early. Nowadays it's early to publish, to write an article and to publish it at the moment. Perhaps a decade later we will mature and address these other matters. And as a colleague that has been inspired by you, I would have preferred to have some publications in a foreign magazine or publication instead of having 10 here. Well, 10 is such a good number, you might say. Why would you forego that for one publication? But with time, the importance attached to certain things change. And sometimes some things are not even heard of in Turkey. And people sometimes will laugh at you. The last name is the most popular one, actually. But in this country, certain importance are attached to given names. To be a correspondent author, for example, is very important. But usually all the correspondent authors try to avoid it. For example, acute coronary infections for diethylhydrochloric acid use, and this survey is about this subject. Well, directly, it might be of interest, but besides that, what a boring title that is there. For example, if the title had been a new treatment in flu, or in cold, people would be interested, would be directly interested. It would draw their attention. With this title, it's open, short, and they would draw attention, fulfills all these criteria and creates a sensation. And for an article to be published in a good magazine, and it must be written in a manner that's easy to read, but the title is important. When an article reaches the editor's table, usually it's the title that draws the first attention. And first impression is received from the title. When it is published, it is the title that is read first. And usually people decide whether they're going to read it or not by just looking at the title. We all do this. For example, this presentation, and since it's systematic, is to have more people read it. If more people read it, naturally we lay the ground for more discussion, so we could be a pioneer, a leader that would lead on and would flow in this manner. The general situation, for example, sometimes we have certain complexes which oppress us in the end. And we need to be a pioneer to lead other people to overcome that. International medical publications, their editors, for example, the Vancouver Committee, must the title insists that the title must draw attention, must be interesting. The title should contain or point out to the contents of the article. How do you make out the title? Words that are easy to understand and would be interesting and short and reflecting the contents of the article. And it should be easy to understand, as I said. A new and effective choice in the treatment of depression. Well, it makes you wonder, makes you curious. And also, if you want to give the subject of the article, do that. Why it's written, what it contains, and don't show what results are reached. Let the reader confront that. The subject should be his prior attraction and then the contents. And also the publication is important, where the article is going to be published. Naturally, technical terminology will be used, but you should try to keep it as simple as possible. The latest and popular professional jargon should be avoided because it would make your article very short-lived and will not be grasped easily. And this should not be the case because you want it to go on for long years. Chlorpromazine, for example, when you talk of clozapine, certain things come to mind. And when you stress something, then you refer to things that are in people's mind, you would have your name well established. The writer should not avoid to make the title as attractive as possible. Scientific authors should not try to make this an arty form of writing. Social phobia and cultural relationship in epidemiological study, for example. The title should give direction to the reader. Then it has fulfilled its function and has been successful. And after the title, the reader should go on to the abstract. What should there be in the abstract? The title should be simple, short. We should avoid names. Should not be sensational, but should draw attention. That's definite. As for the abstract, and it should be short and concise. That gives the main framework of the study. Summaries or abstracts. Following the title, it gives the reader a point to decide on. And this part is very influential for the editor to choose this article. This was very important because previously they could not even go into evaluation phase. But now certain things have passed by. And usually we were articles that were sent to the editor were rejected at that phase. It did not go ahead further than the editor's table. The abstract should be short, informative, and should be written in an intelligent manner. It should summarize the article and give the contents in summary. And we should try to make this the most brilliant part of the article. If vis-à-vis all this, the abstracts, structure-wise, are weak, indirect, and it is written in this manner. In some of them, vital points are not touched on, and some things are left suspended for the reader. If in the main article is not present, what is the worth of this abstract? Especially in Turkish magazines, they're still very bad. And yes, for the past 10 years, they're pretty bad. We haven't made any ground or any development, realized any development in that aspect. There are 100, 200 references, pages and pages. What bores us? So why should I read it? is it worth wasting my time to read something? And the editors of some magazines try to put things into order, and they especially donate titles to the authors and organize abstract forms. All the publications undertake that. According to the Vancouver group, for the non-formal abstracts, 150 words, and for the formal abstracts, 250 words are found appropriate.
Sometimes when the publisher says you should include this and that in your summary, this should be the title, there should be a conclusion, objectives, etc. should be defined, and they give you 30 words or 70 words. These are restrictions. Others say that it should not be more than 200 words or 250 words. It all depends on the publisher or the editor. What should a summary contain? Why did we do what we have done? What did we do? What did we find? What were the results? Let's start. Why do we research a subject? For example, X is a substance that we use for the treatment of reactive depression. There are many anecdotes, and as psychiatric professionals, we have decided to carry out a controlled study. This is 30 words. So what did we do? In hospital X, in region X, we determined the depression cases and carried out a double-blind placebo-controlled study. The medication X was compared to placebo. At the end of 3 months and 6 months, the patients were assessed by Hammer Depression Scale, and their social disorders were determined. 48 words. 48 volunteers received X and 52 received placebo. At the end of 3 months there was no difference, but at the end of 6 months there was a statistical difference between the medication group and the placebo. What were the results? The treatment of depression in a professional seems to be more effective than placebo, but the efficacy can only be apparent after the 3 month use. And within 139 words you can write the summary. We have been able to use 139 effectively. We don't even need 250 words. Publications also want background methods, results and conclusions. And others also want design, setting, subjects, main outcome measures, etc. It all depends on the journal. We have to abide by the rules of the journal. In the summary, we should not start with the preamble. But sometimes people copy and paste the beginning and the end of the article and compose this into a summary. That's not what you should do. You should prepare a separate summary. There is no need to give detailed information in a summary, and results and information should not be contradictory. 5 years ago, people used to give p-values and summary, but they don't do it anymore. That's not necessary. And so there are certain technical publications which still say the same thing. When you complete the summary, you should have one of your colleagues read it, or maybe you can read it out to him, see whether it attracts his interest or not. But this colleague should be someone who is not an expert in the same field. If your wife is not a physician, let her read it. If she can understand it, fine. You can really get a very good response. After completing your publication, your article, leave it aside for 1 week and review it after 1 week. Because you're working on it all the time and you don't see some of the mistakes. Let me tell you an anecdote about my past. In 1999, I decided to go for a foreign publication, and I said I want to have at least 10 publications, 10 articles in foreign journals. At that time, there was a professor, and she asked me, do you have any publications in foreign journals? I said, well, I don't have any at the moment, but I'm going to prepare them and have them published. That was my objective. At that time, I was writing all my articles in Turkish, and later it was translated into English. I was working very hard. I was writing everything in Turkish, and then having it later translated and sent to a journal. The journal asked for some clarification, and there were also some of the publications that I used. Now we know that the article should be reviewed by a native English speaker. I have a colleague who specialized in England, and I asked my colleague to look at this article, and my colleague looked at the article and he said, did you send this to a Turkish journal? And I said, no, I sent it to a foreign journal, but I forgot to translate part of it. So when you work on something very hard, sometimes you miss important issues. That's the reason why I tell you to leave it to someone who's outside this field. I have some very interesting anecdotes about my past experiences. The Vancouver group also wants to help those who index the articles, and they have defined 10 keywords or key sentences which should be added to the summary. Let me give you an example. The key words could be antidepressants, depression, material X, etc. And the title could be in the treatment of reactive depression, X drug can be studied in a randomized double-blind study. Now let's start with the preamble. It should be very brief. It should clearly define the objective of the study. It should be brief, and it should clearly indicate what the objective of the study is. The first sentence should express everything that you want to say, and the person who reads the article should think for a minute, try to understand what you're trying to accomplish. The first sentence is most important. I work a lot in the field of genetics, and I'm very careful about my publications. I try to find a very striking initial sentence. For example, if you start with a sentence like, we don't know the genetic structure of schizophrenia, that would be very striking. You can say that the etiology of schizophrenia is still unclear. That would be a very striking and important sentence, because it clarifies what you are doing. And it is indicating that you are trying to make a contribution to an unknown factor. We have to decide what to say, what to include. Is it necessary or worthy of mentioning? What is the correct format for this publication? Where should it be published? In which journal? When planning a study, you should consider where you want to send your article to. In the 90s, we had CDs. We did not have internet, so we used to go and get the CDs. What we can now do in a few seconds in PubMed, we used to wait 1 month. You can imagine how difficult it was. We tried to find a journal. Let's say that we found a journal, and the journal has an address. That is wonderful. So we find the address and write a letter to the editor. The journals were not always available. I once carried out a genetic study and I had very good results. And at the Congress I saw the psychiatry journal, International Psychiatry Journal. I picked up the journal and I wrote my article and sent it to Comprehensive Psychiatry. The editor sent my article back. And I also cited the editor of the article, but I did not know that I did so. Actually, the editor wrote by hand. He said, "This is a very good article, but we are not publishing biological articles." Can you imagine? I have sent an article on genetics to a journal which does not publish information or articles about genetics, about biology. And he also recommended that I send an article to Psychiatric Genetics. I did so and it was published. But at that time nobody really knew where to send their articles. We had to send it to any journal we could find. We learned by trial and error. The aim of the article should be clearly established. The editorial board find it very boring if you don't specifically define your aim or objective. Your objective should not be publication for the sake of publication or for the purpose of advancing your career. There are people who can make a living by making publications, or there are people abroad who can make a living out of research revenues. That does not exist in Turkey. It's really something that is auxiliary for us. Sometimes people find it very romantic to have an article published. And in the first part of your article you have to clearly define why you carried out this study. You should also systematically describe what previous studies have accomplished and also mention why you decided to carry out a further study. That will be an indication of your comprehensive information about the literature. I'm now on the editorial board of many publications. We have excellent domestic journals also. Some of the publications were really awful. I try to see whether an article is acceptable or not. If the article has been sent to me in 2006 and if the references are 1999 or 2002 and the article is sent to the journal in 2006, that's totally unacceptable. For 4 years they haven't really followed up what's happening. In 4 years so many things can change. This was a biological study. It was not anything related to the general psychiatry field. It is a biological study, so by ignoring 4 years of further studies, I believe that they have done something totally wrong. Here there is an article that has been prepared for hernia treatment. The patient asked us whether anesthesia could be impaired because he is taking ecstasy 4 times a week. We looked into the literature. We could not find any previous publication. That's why we decided to study this subject. You have to believe that editors don't want to publish and people don't want to read your article. So you have to make it attractive for the reader. Any study that will not contribute to the field you are studying should not be carried out. Our colleagues should not be trying to have their articles published in every journal, in every publication. There are certain journals which publish articles prepared by younger physicians, and professors should not have their name added to the list of participants. We should try to improve our ability to carry out the study. Let me give an example of a bad this is not a very good example of an opening paragraph. This is really very bad because it's only showing references. Here we are presenting two patients, and we have also reviewed the literature. They are referring to literature, but that literature is totally unrelated to the subject at hand. You must clearly indicate which information is coming from which source. Instead of saying 1-7, you can say 1-2 or 3-4. You have to clearly indicate which information is coming from which source. That is not acceptable. Here you say that in a previous study, regular use of ecstasy will create respiratory problems during anesthesia. In this study, we are trying to understand respiratory functions in a detailed manner, and we're presenting a 2-year study. If you were one of the editors, which publication, which article would you prefer to publish? It was clearly defined the previous studies, and now it is also explaining the objectives of the study. An author should also clearly define the question to which he is trying to find an answer. After having systematically screened the literature, you can easily and clearly indicate the objective of your study. In this way, the reader will understand what you are doing. You have to review the literature before starting your study. It would be useful to contact people who work in the same area. If you want to do something in a specific field, you have to plan something that will be completion of previous studies. It's not hard to do that. Now you can look into PubMed, you can find all the articles. The people who have published in PubMed, they have their emails. Write them and they will respond to you. I have responded to every query, and people I have written to will always came back to me. Citation is most important. Normally it is very important. In Turkey we don't really understand the importance of citation, but there's something that's called impact factor. The impact factor of the science journal is 40. American Journal of Psychiatry has impact factor is 6.6 or 7. But AGP is a clinical journal, and there will not be many citations. The basic science, basic research citation index is very high, but AGP has only 6 or 7 citation index. What do we mean by 6? It means that every article published in that journal has received at least 6 citations. And editors don't want to publish a low quality article. The impact factor of a professor is very important. He may have 50 articles but only 100 citations, so the impact factor is 2. That is why the professors or authors do not want to add a name to unacceptable articles. Professors prefer to keep their impact factor high. Unfortunately, we don't have this concept in Turkey. The person who's reading your article will understand the importance of the subject that you are studying and will also understand that you have followed up the literature. Let me show you 2 examples. You will see the trend. You look into the previous studies, and you cannot, of course, present all the previous studies, but when you read the previous studies, if you screen the literature, you can really understand what has been done in this field, and you should be as brief as possible. Citing many sources is not attribute of the article. You have to select the right sources, and you should cite the first article on the subject. You start with the first citation, the first article. You can skip several in the middle, and if you find it important, of course, you will refer to it. All your references will have to be meaningful. You don't have to refer to all the articles between the intervening years.
And also, from amongst the sources that are concerning our subject, we have to select the best. Then you will be able to make comparisons about the superior and weak aspects of your article. And also, you must convince the editor and the reader that you are well informed. For example, I had sent an article, and still, lipoprotein small a, that was popular in cardiologic diseases at one time. And I sent it to the editor. In 1 hour, the editor refused it. The refusal came back in 1 hour because the conditions could not be controlled satisfactorily. The editor said he did not believe in the reality of that article. And so she was not convinced. She immediately refused it, rejected it. And again, I sent an article to the editor of a journal, and they updated the principles of their acceptance, whereas I had sent the article according to the former old system. Even the address was wrong. It was a previous address. So in 15 days, they accepted this in 2 weeks. It's very important for the editor to pay attention and accept it. Actually, I could not even believe my eyes when I read the words accepted. And this is what they do. This is their attitude, that they can adapt against something that they appreciate. And I sent another article measuring the dimensions of the hippocampus, and they asked for pictures. And then with this image quality, I'm not sure that you'll be able to measure correctly with such an image. It's not satisfactory, so we rejected it. It was on schizophrenia, and also it concerned social psychiatry or something, but this was an important journal in their field, and they did not accept it. So, with this method, we will not consider this. And in one sentence, they express their refusal. I do dislike the reject words. I have written 50 articles. It still disturbs me when I read the word reject. It offends me. Now, two types of presentations can be made here. The type that says, I know everything, I can manage everything. But also, I have chosen to tell you everything as it is. I've had written articles, most of which were rejected, and smaller amount were accepted. For example, I started on the genetics of some medication, and then the rejections increased suddenly. And even the reason has not been shown. And we sat down and asked why it was refused. I was sending it to clinical journals. And actually, they're taking the advertisements from medication that I'm criticizing. I changed it. I sent it to the research journals. It's accepted now. The research journal have a higher quality, which we gather from the impact. But I just recently became aware of this. I've been in this ever since 1994. I've started writing articles in 1994. I found this out in 2009. So there is no end to learning. You're continuously learning something new all the time. So, the introductory part, you must convince the editor that you possess satisfactory knowledge. The editors, in the articles that reach them, and they're usually happy when their names are cited. But I don't think that's the only reason. I mean, if you cite something that is not qualified, it will be refused. I put it here because Richard Smith said that, not myself. And editor donor of comparative psychiatry, and I made a reference citation of his own article, and he wrote down in his own handwriting that I should send it to that journal. Serotonin transport, for example, was very popular in 1999, and in temporal pain I had worked on this transport, and fibromyalgia was not possible, so forth, and somatic depression should be considered, and the neurologists call it a stress headache. That's depression, and the temporal joint pain is depression. I still argue on that. And I worked on the genes in migraine as well. The same genes are related. So genetically, what I had argued has been proven. I wrote this article, sent it to the journal, and the American journal, since the first in the world, and we didn't have the internet previously. You arranged it in 5 copies, and you sent it. It was sent to each judge, 1 copy. So he took this with a red pencil. He made corrections, and well, my English wasn't all that good, probably. So it was all red, actually. And then, in a schematic form, he drew the diagram by hand, and the paragraph he took in a circle, and then wrote it himself in place of that paragraph. And we understand that they wish to print it. They have chosen to print it. When it came back, we all laughed about it. He had assisted us. He wasn't acting as a judge and was helping us. So I corrected it and I sent it back, and it got printed. It's an effective article, and if the quality is good, people are ready to help you. For example, a revision came, and it was a minor revision So I made a criticism. So a minor revision I thought would be accepted, but it was rejected, it was refused. And you correct a major revision, it gets accepted. With a minor revision, it is rejected and comes back. So what the judges and editors say, their point of view is acceptable. And if they tell you not to do something, you don't do it. And also you have to write separately to each editor and judge separately. You must convince each of them separately. Previously we just wrote a page and sent it. So he asked for that. I did it. I didn't do it. Why I didn't do it, or I did it. And I have these examples. Actually, we should not be excessive in explanations. And you must be sure that you have comprehended the importance of the questions that are addressed. And also the researchers, even with a sentence, should define the content of their work. That is desirable. For example, people who drink 3 glasses of alcohol per week in their addiction, and also whether it has any effect on coronary artery or not. And also the most difficult part of the article, to have the proper structure. It's easier to play around with the sentences. Usually the editors like to play around with the sentences. If the framework is undesirable, they say it has to be written down again. If the structure, framework is weak, it's important that you establish the framework according to the desired limits. And Tim Alberts, who was a medical journalist, has given examples of introductory sentences. We don't have that concept, a medical journalist, for example. And we have correspondence for parliament, for military, and so forth. But there is a medical journalist as well. It's not established in this country. We don't hear about it. I believe there was a press conference and certain sensational things went on. The psychopharmacology society, for example, became popular. 3 sensational sentences, for example. The journalist asked the economic crisis, is it affecting you or not, and so forth. And so it's possible. But you can't say they will go into recession. It's a possibility that you can say. The press conference went on for 1 hour. In the evening, well, what about sexuality? The question was that it would influence sexuality. They took 3 sentences. Hasan HERKEN pointed out that the economic crisis will influence the sexuality. I mean, their approach and perspective is very different from ours. Why did that come out from, they might ask? I mean, so many things were said, they just picked up something. You must not be obstinate in your expression in scientific articles, and also make no reference to literature, poets, and so forth. And also, it should not be like Goethe and also the sacred books or Alice in Wonderland. And you must know the reader very well to make a good introduction, which should be short, and the reader must be clearly told the reason why the study was carried out, or why it is more comprehensive than the previous examples. You must exhibit all matters in a clear manner, and in the first few sentences of the article, you must get the attention of the readers with your attractive sentences. And as for the method of scientific articles, you must explain your plan, how the data is collected and analyzed. This should be defined in a logical manner. And after that, it's easier to put it down in writing. After completing the article, If you come across a problem or remember something after it's over, actually, when you started, the statistics must be known, the method should be determined, and the introduction should be written. So, that way you can conclude it in a proper manner. Well, when you start by saying, let's do something, collect the statistics and so forth, that's not possible. You can't produce a good quality writing. And, for example, if what Osman had found out, I would not have done it. After completion of the article, during publication, any problems in a method or a plan would mean sacrificing the funds and also time. These should be settled before starting to write the article. And I talk about the method, and I expect other people's contribution, even those that have not worked in that field. I get their ideas and outlook. This is nothing special, but this is a necessity that must be fulfilled. And the reader should he usually wonders about what hypothesis is being tried out rather than what tools are used. A simple hypothesis, for example, can be very important. The statistical analysis on this should be given in a separate paragraph. In the analysis of the statistics, if a not too widely used test has been used, this should be explicitly given together with the number of its version, and this statistical analysis should be clearly defined as to how the comparison has been made. Nowadays we have the statistics part, and also we have the percentages. Following that conclusion of statistics, refusals increased, refused by editors, and second and third phase statistics came about. And 10 or 15 years ago, this was not carried out. Usually it was considered as too great an approach. But these have become just ordinary run-of-the-mill matters.
One of the most important part of the article is the plan of the article and the design of the article. Here you have to define your criteria. Is it a randomized study? What are the inclusion and exclusion criteria? All these have to be clearly depicted. The method part of an article shows that it is a serious study or not. A serious study should clearly define the method of study. What else do we have in the method defined? How do we plan a study? You have to give descriptions as brief as possible. You have to give us the different sections different names. How did you collect your study cases? Why did you exclude certain subjects? You have to get ethics board approval, because if you are caught, you will be punished. You will lose your credibility, and if you get a warning from an ethics board, that will really be very bad for you. You have to obtain an ethics board approval, otherwise you should not carry out the study. I always write letters to the ethics board, and I say that if there is any change in the biological parameter, and then I ask for another letter for another approval and carry on the study. As I said, the ethics board is very important. It's like a nun who is doing unethical things. You have to give detailed information about your methods, about the dosing of the medication. You have the information about specific technique or other materials that you are using. You have to give the p-value, you have to give the statistical analysis tests. People who are reading this article would like to know where you put your test subjects in ethics. In the exam approval form, you have to clearly define your inclusion and exclusion criteria, biological materials and raw materials, as well as the animals that you use in your study or the equipment that you have in the laboratory has to be very clearly defined. We are carrying out a study that is based on a specific method, and we have found these results, and the results are published. What we mean is, if you do exactly what I have done, you will obtain the same results. Somebody should be able to copy your study without having to call you. You have to write everything very clearly. You have to define your equipment. You have to give your statistical methods, inclusion and exclusion criteria, etc. If all these are not available, then your study cannot be repeated. A standard study can be repeated. Similar or the same results should be obtained. That's our objective. That's our objective. Somebody has carried out a research project, then they came up with certain results. If I do the same thing, if I find something else, that will of course start a discussion. If the method that you are using is a classical method, then you don't need to go for detailed information. A special method or infrequent use method should be clearly explained, and references should be given about that method. If it's a new method, you have to give references and you have to clearly describe your method. You don't have to describe the method fully. The method part of the study should be able to answer the following questions. What is the major objective? What are we trying to assess? What are we trying to experiment with? And what are the variables? Under which conditions have the measurements been taken? Are the methods and measurements reliable? Is the analysis acceptable? And can somebody else repeat the same experiment? Now we come to the findings. Your findings may not be in line with your expectations, and sometimes you will have to give up your hypothesis, or you will have to write up about the data that you have obtained but you have not been expecting, that you have not expected at the beginning. Editors don't like results are depicted in table 1 to 5. Now, this should not be the kind of reference you are giving. The person who is reading your article should be able to follow your line of thought, and the editors should clearly understand which graphs or which tables you are using. You have to clearly define what you are showing in table 3 or in graph 4. We have to add graphs and tables. The graphs and tables clearly indicate the difference or the disparity between the results. After if 3 parameters have changed and you show it in a graph, you will attract the attention of the reader. Just referring to the tables is not sufficient. For example, you can say that PPR gene is responsible or is related to olanzapine related body weight increase, and you prepare a table, and this is table 1, and you show this very clearly. It attracts the attention of the reader. And the subject that you have examined should clearly be defined in detail, and the reader should be able to read about the subjects of the study. The specific characteristics of the findings should be clearly given in this section of the article. And here the reader should read the text like a story. When you read it in a different language, you may not see it like a story. But even though it's not your native language, you can see that certain things are easy to read. And sometimes very famous writers have written books that I cannot read. I don't like the language, or maybe it is not a very good story. Even a Nobel Prize winner can write a book that is not easy to read. It may be difficult to notice this in an article that's written in a foreign language. Tables should clearly give the summary of your findings in a statistical manner. Researchers working in the same field can benefit from the pictures, photographs, and imaging results. Editors and readers can easily follow what's happening in pictures and tables. If there are any mistakes, all these have to be very clearly defined. And you have to use all modalities of expression in order to give information. The groups may be random groups. If there is a misalignment of groups in your discussion, you will have to explain whether this is meaningful or significant or not, and you have to explain everything very clearly. In a study, you can come up with unexpected results that should be mentioned in your findings, in the paragraph on the findings, and you also have to explain the relative importance of your findings. In the discussion part of the article, you can go into further detail and then define what you're planning to do in the future. Statistics. Statistics can be clearly expressed in many articles. You can use different statistical tests. When you're planning your study, you also normally select the statistical tests that you're going to use. After completing the study, you should not take it to the statistician and ask him what he can do with all these results. You have to plan everything very carefully in order to obtain relevant results. At the end of the study, if you say, I wish I had looked into this detail or that detail, you can see that you have made a mistake in planning your article or your study. You will not have this article published in a good journal. Now, the Turkish journals are also very high quality journals. There is a serious increase in the quality of the journal. I think that is indeed very important. Now, your findings may be about your patients, your subjects, but if the subjects in your research project are less than 100, you should not give percentages. You should clearly indicate how many cases you have studied. You can only give the values and the distribution of these values. You can give mean values and standard deviation values. That should be sufficient. Less than 100 subjects does not warrant the percentage. It all depends on what the journal editor wants. Does he want standard deviation or whatever? I was once criticized because in one publication I gave standard error and in another I gave standard deviation. I said this is what the editor wanted. I have to abide by these rules. So if you want standard deviation, I will provide standard deviation. In some normal distributions, you have to use logarithmic scales, and you have to give median values as well as quartiles and confidence intervals. In tables, you can give confidence intervals as well as standard errors. Statistical analysis, variance analysis uh, and other types of analysis can also be. Avoid unnecessary data. Underline important data. You should not explain everything in great detail. I decided that, I did that, etc. That is not relevant. You will clearly indicate what you have found when comparing two groups of patients. There is no need to go into detail. I can give you 300 or 400 slides instead of 100 slides. And if you're writing on a specific field, if you're researching a specific field, first look at the best articles in the field. You have a study you have carried out, and you're going to write an article, but look at the previous examples in the same field. You can copy not the content, but you can copy the structure. Examine the articles, the best articles written on the subject, and try to understand what they have done. You can also adopt the style of another author. That is not something harmful. Some people believe that when you are sending an article, when you're sending an article to a foreign journal, you're not going to copy the same sentence. A sentence like the etiology of schizophrenia is not known. This is a statement of fact. Some people use the word unknown. Some people use the word elusive. That is not necessary because it is a statement of fact. It's a very simple sentence. The fact that you're using the same sentence does not mean that your study is a copy of the previous article. The Hakem.
Judge.
The judges usually repeat your tests and try to control your results, and they will use the same test. We do it from time to time. The statistics will always create a problem in that manner. If you provide too much information, then the judges will sometimes try to see whether your data is correct or not. Sometimes the statistics are not well performed. The groups are unacceptable. And as a judge, when I was looking into that article, I found the statistical significance. There are different programs. You can put the figures in and you can come up with a result. The person who wrote the article did not consult a statistician. Let's say that p-value in this group of patients should be 5, not more than 5. But if this article says 0.042, and then the value should be 5 or 6, you learn it in time. The 0.042 is not acceptable. That is very high. It's not really in line with the results, so you can easily and very clearly see the mistake. And you send it back. The judges can check your statistical results. It happened to me and it can happen to you. If you say 0.005 and the other values are not in line, then you can perhaps put in 1 0 too many. Each table should be used for indicating the solution of a specific problem. The group characteristics should not be given as demographic characteristics. A certain journalists ask you to use words such as in schizophrenia, and they put this at the top of every page. You have to abide by the rules and regulations of the journal. It's like going to a restaurant and acting as expected. There are certain things that we learn about. You have to accept the rules and regulations of the journal. I look into the journal, I look at some articles, and I see that the journal has a specific form. So you have to adapt your form according to the request of the journal. When preparing a table, you have to realize that people read from left to right. People don't like to read from left to right. People don't like to read vertical lines. Anything you want people, the reader to pay attention to should be on a horizontal line, not on a vertical line. Sometimes people have some mistakes and they try to copy the other tables. If I'm working in a different field, I try to copy the previous article and try to do the same thing. If you're presenting a table, there should also be a text. If you have less than 100 subjects in your group, don't give percentages. When summarizing your findings, you have to give upper and lower limits and central tendencies and mean values, and if there is variant analysis, you have to give F values, you have to prepare tables and graphs, and you have to prepare them according to the authors, etc. Let me show you one of my previous studies. The values here are about schizophrenia and control. Actually, you see that's a mistake. Schizophrenia values should be here and the control values should be more to the right. You can make a much better table. This is not easy to read. This is also in line with people's tendencies to read. The classification is easy to read and easy to understand. Maybe the font should be smaller here. And the abbreviations can also be given in a different form. Here we have abbreviations NS. Actually, the font should be different here. Well, this chosen picture can express many things. Sometimes it's easier to comprehend something when you see it in the form of a picture or in the form of a graph. And drawing on a picture may lead us to think, if it is possible, show your results in the form of a graph, or read the summaries in graphs. Graphs are very interactive. This is the easiest part of the article. When you're planning your study, you should define the question that you are trying to find the response to. And in the method, you define the methods that you're going to use. In the planning part, you have to know how you're going to describe your results. What is your objective? What kind of tables or what kind of graphs you need? Before starting your research project, you will have to prepare the graphs and tables. In the text, the tables are very important, and the graphs make it easy for the reader. Now we come to the discussion. We indicate the main findings. We have to give the limitation of the method. You have to write the limitations of your method, makes it stronger. It clearly indicates what you have done and what you have not been able to do. You're not exaggerating, you are clearly defining the limitations of your method. That will make your study stronger, and it's very important. If you don't define your limitations, everybody will see your limitations, and they will look for further limitations. Any limitation of the method should be mentioned by the author, and the reader can read it, can understand it, and may even make reference to it. Your findings should be compared to previous publications. The meaning of the findings should be discussed. The contribution to the literature should be defined, and you should give a roadmap for future studies. Why did you carry out the study? Is there any contribution? Does it make any addition to the previous literature? You have to indicate the future path. You can say, well, we have done this and done this publication in the future. Maybe we will be concentrating on this area or that area. And anyone who reads this, any editor who reads this, will be aware that you have the intent to continue your studies. Both the judge and the editor are convinced that you're interested in the subject and you will continue to work on the same subject.
That's all very fine, but it's not as in the past. It's increasing now. Well, the work is fine, but why? What effect has it given rise to? What was it influential on? I look into that on a 10-page article. So you read it, you go back, consider the contents, and try to find out its influence. It's definitely very important to give a roadmap for the future. But while doing that, you should not commit suicide. And being over-modest, for example. We don't have the corresponding words to some of the Turkish concepts, like begging your forgiveness and so forth. Well, the meaning is that, well, I did this, but it's nothing too great. And they call this an Oriental approach or mentality. And it's difficult for us to boast. It's considered as a form of boasting if you say, I did this, this is so and so. And also for limitations, you don't have to be so oriental in your approach and in your mentality. For example, it's interesting for the Westerners to see the oriental mentality in our culture. You do something, you succeed in something, and you try to be modest. And also everything should be taken in the sequence of the proper procedure and logic. And you register the findings in previous studies, and you must stress the contradictions or conflicts with previous articles. And you can make this comparison so that your perspective can be accepted more easily. For example, patients that have intravenous cyclizine or intravenous water, and it's 7 to 36, 17%, I'm sorry, to 36%. And it's a young effect against cyclizine. And in these two sentences, for example, the nausea that it created has been mentioned. The main aspect of the content is stressed, and that it can consist as a start for the discussion. You can do it in a clear manner with sentences that are short. For example, Black and White in 1971, he pointed out that the post of AC infections incidence did not show an improvement. It depended on intraoral measures, and these measures compared to our methods is less specific. And it was similar to what was indicated by Pink and Blue in 1991. And Black-White study and its shortcomings have been clearly stated, and the study that has directed him, and it's easy here to see the clarity of thought and expression that belongs to the writer. And the method for measuring, it was less specific compared to ours. He didn't have many cases to follow up. The follow-up duration was short. Perhaps it was retrospective, not prospective like ours. In this manner, you stress the importance of your own study. Some authors discuss the previous articles in literature. And this does not show the perfection or awareness, but the working groups, which is, you have to concentrate on working groups that concern your subject. In given fields, people that work in this field, for example, the saying and thinking that I know what people write and say in my field, and what I write actually is read by them as well. These are the things that are well known. But in editor, if we take an editor, I remember during my student days, and an article was sent by an associate professor to a well-known journal, and everybody had wondered, but while selecting the judges, people are not sent because they are a prominent professor, but who has been responsible for carrying that out. And the first choice is the person that has carried out the survey. And usually that person is selected and sent as the judge. And someone that knows the subject best should receive that article for assessment. But I think this aspect is starting to develop in this country. And, for example, some of the articles that do not concern your specialization are not referred or sent to you anymore. And these articles should be considered to assess their own data, and you should also get the point of view of your trustworthy peers and working colleagues. But perhaps you could ask about the conclusion and other matters as well. An important difficulty, in fact, is that to recall some of the incidences. By limiting it to 2 previous years, we thought we should reduce the rate of error to the minimal. For example, usually women forget during oxytocin, and if the memory had not been blunted, the woman would never give birth to a second baby. And also discussion of method. It's wrong to insist that your method is perfect. It's like something like the hackers. And you develop something, hackers cannot break through. Well, you're wrong. If you start with such a grand sentence, the hackers will be able to do their work. The scientific narcissism, for example, both as writing or judging or editorship, you have to overcome that. and you might criticize the judges, and this guy will send you something in writing. The editor does not always forward this to you, and sometimes they can, and you will see how you have been evaluated. So it's proper that you assess or evaluate your method in the discussion. This is of special importance. If you have to look at previous methods, then you would get a good chance to reflect a good side of your survey. It's important to lay down everything explicitly and in a polite manner. For example, the finding is that the implementation of prophylactic heparin and with a patient series of 780 patients and extradural local anesthesia injection was used and no important complications were encountered. And this implementation has become a proper part and parcel of what we resort to in our hospital. And if the routine implementation is to be changed accordingly, this point needs to be discussed. And also it must be clearly laid down what the meaning of this is. And it's on for the sake of science, and you have to point out how this has opened up the horizons of science. So we tend to think that with our cases, this is an aspect that we express and confirm what we have found out. And also the points that we have determined. And one sentence can actually be forceful enough to have the whole article passed through and published. And also to carry out other surveys and research. One concerning brain tissue, for example. And some findings that show hepatocellular damage and the analysis of hepatotoxicity risk should be looked into. And research to be carried out later on this subject is an indication for the reader, and it's a roadmap. The purpose is the main findings are laid down and the deficiencies of the method, and to discuss the meaning of the findings, the conclusions, and to give a roadmap for following researchers. It's 7 o'clock. Well, the part where you express your thank and gratitude is very important. And sometimes you try to write down the names of everyone. According to the co-editor's principle, it's very difficult about the writer's rights, and to collect the data and founds is not enough to grant you certain rights. But people have given their service for this, and sometimes names are written down and referred to because there are certain heads of clinics and important persons, acknowledgements like this, for example. And I'll go over this very rapidly. As for the sources, how the sources should be, there are the indices. It should be in keeping with the indices, and you prepare a correct list of sources. And it's not only the list, but for articles you have to mention the name of the journals as well. For example, the sources. Those have undertaken the writing of an article will have to attach more importance to the sources. And 20% have been laid down to be wrong and misleading. And sometimes it's 46% errors and 39% have mistakes as depicted in the British Journal of Surgery. And you can download it directly from the Medline. For example, there are some parts that are not deleted, there are mistakes, and it clearly shows that people sort of put these things together in a hurried manner. You control everything, never send it without detailed control. After controlling it and ratifying it, and please ask your colleagues and peers to make a serious criticism of your article and not to be too polite. And revision is important since English is not our native language. This makes it difficult. Then posting. And posting, usually, we have examples. You can copy this. And you can take the parentheses. Now it comes from the internet, and there are instructions that give you directions anywhere. The editors, let's say it reaches the editor, and the printing process starts with that. You might be refused a major revision or a minor revision, and it must be requested, and it might be accepted as it is today. I've felt that happiness twice without any amendments or corrections. It was accepted as it was. But it's only 1% probability. It happened twice in my lifetime. After the revision is made, corrections are undertaken. You have to write a letter of explanation why you did some things and why you did not do it to the judges. Don't be too narcissistic when you are doing it. You must be polite and exact, make special interpretations, and you have to express your ideas. You must not be subjective. You don't repeat your points of view that exist in the original article. Previously, I remember way back in 1996, the judges sent their criticism, and we wrote back whatever they asked for have been fulfilled, and we sent it back. This is what we did. We did not realize it was the wrong method. One by one, each judge's request should be answered, and why it was done or not done. The first, second, third, and if there's a fourth judge, and also to the editor. You have to write 5 versions to each individual. You have to respond to whatever they're asking you, just as at court. Whatever they ask, you should answer that.
Of course, you will write a separate letter to the editor. Or you can say, Judge 2 proposed to do this or to do that, and I couldn't do it because it would impair the quality of the article. Judge 3 is asking for something else which is contradictory to the request of Judge 2, etc. You have to write this to the editor. You have to start by thanking the editor. Here you can see my letter to Dr. Delise. I still receive rejections. I always start by thanking the reviewers for their help. This is reviewer 2. This is a letter to the editor. We carry out studies, and well, of course it was in our careers, but when you look back, you can decide where you have made mistakes and what you have done relatively acceptable. So I went back and looked into the index, and so one of my studies, which was published in 2001, it was cited 70 times in 8 years between 2001 and 2009. 70 citations is acceptable for a clinical article. So this is a successful article. So this was a big fish. I have got a big fish. But I can show you another article of mine which has been cited only 37 times. I really worked very hard here in order to have this article published. Actually, 37 citations is not too bad. Let me see. This article received 24 citations. It's actually a letter. Another article, 70 times cited. It was published in 2007. It was cited 12 times. An article published in 2003, it was cited only 8 times. So this is not really very good. This is cited only 8 times, so I don't think this is a good article. If it was 30, it would be acceptable. So I didn't catch a big fish here. I did not hit the target with this article. You know that the authorities speak about the factor that's called the hash factor. You may have 100 publications. If 5 of them have received 5 citations, then your hash factor is 5. If 10 articles receive 10 citations, the hash factor is 10. This hash factor is very important for your promotion. Hash factor is very important. It's like impact factor. This is not a very good citation.